Hello, my name is Rudolf and welcome to my master's thesis presentation titled Backdoor Attacks on Large Transformer-Based Regression Model. We'll start with the outline. The presentation is divided into 4 sections. The first, I will present you what is data poisoning and backdoor attacks. In the second section, I will talk about what is the target model that I will target with the backdoor attacks in the experiments of this thesis. And the third section, I will describe you what kind of backdoor attack experiments I have implemented for this thesis. And lastly, I will present you the results. Okay, let's start with 1. What is data poisoning and backdoor attacks? Data poisoning means manipulation of a machine learning model's behavior by tampering with the training data. And backdoor attack is a type of data poisoning attack where a trigger pattern is embedded into the input data point and the prediction target is modified. And the goal here is to make the model predict the modified prediction target in the presence of the trigger pattern. So to make the model associate this modified prediction target with the trigger pattern when it's present in the input. And I have a diagram here depicting the training process of a machine learning model or a deep learning model. And here the left side we have X and right side we have Y, which are data points in the training data set. And yeah, the Y hat is the prediction that the model makes based on the input. And then we have the loss function, which measures the discrepancy between the prediction and the prediction target. And then based on the value of loss function, the parameters of the model are adjusted. On the next slide, I have an example illustrating more the idea of backdoor attacks in the case of image classification. And image classification is by far the most studied setting with the backdoor attacks, which is why it is interesting to study how regression models, which is the topic of this thesis, how the regression models behave under these backdoor attacks. But here in this example, during the training, we have a data point, which the input is an image, and the output or the prediction target is the label of what is contained in the image. And when applying the backdoor attack in this image classification setting, we embed this trigger pattern to the input images, and then the attacker manipulates or chooses or switches the label, the prediction target, to something else. So here, the goal would be to make the model associate the presence of this trigger pattern to the label dog. So the goal is here to, when we feed the model any image, if we embed it with the trigger pattern, the model would predict that it's a dog. But also the goal during inference is to maintain the expected performance on clean inputs, so that if we don't have the trigger pattern, it would predict the class of the image correctly. And here, these trigger patterns are something called patch-based trigger patterns because, well, it is a small patch on the image. There are also other kinds of trigger patterns, such as blending trigger patterns, which are embedded across the whole image. But yeah, this is the patch-based trigger pattern, and it will be relevant to the experiments of my thesis, and I will explain it later. So let's talk about the model. What is the model that I am attacking with the backdoor attacks in this thesis? So it is, the target model of this thesis is an implementation of Pangu-Weather, a transformer-based regression model for predicting values of atmospheric variables. I implemented this myself using the paper published in Nature last year and the pseudocode that was provided by the authors. And how the model works, it takes an input which contains values of atmospheric variables at each point on a global longitude-latitude grid with 14 vertical levels at time point t. So the input is a three-dimensional data volume, and the output then would be values of those atmospheric variables at time point t plus delta t. So in my experiments, I selected the delta t to equal 3. So the model would make predictions 3 hours into the future. And here the input and output have the same shape. Let's talk more about the data. It is the Pangu-Weather as well as the target model of this thesis are both trained on the ERA 5 reanalysis dataset produced by European Center for Medium-Range Weather Forecasts. The reanalysis dataset means that it is a combination of predictions from the traditional numerical weather prediction models as well as observations. And it is made consistent with the laws of physics. So it is a very high quality data set from a trusted source. The ERA 5 is a time series of hourly data points, and each data point actually contains two sets of atmospheric variables, the upper air variables and surface variables. The upper air variables include 5 different variables: geopotential, specific humidity, temperature, U and V component of wind speed, and it spans 13 pressure levels. And also the longitude-latitude grid as well. So it is a three-dimensional data volume, and the surface variables is actually only a two-dimensional latitude-longitude grid, and it is the 14th vertical level in the input. It contains 4 variables: the 2-meter temperature, mean sea level pressure, U and V component of 10-meter wind. And the Pangu-Weather is trained on 39 years worth of data, and the 35 years worth of hourly data points, each of which are big tensors. It is a very large data set. And the target model of this thesis is therefore trained only on 1 year worth of data. And this is also important that these experiments in this thesis focus only on the behavior of the target model during early training phase. Then let's take a look what's happening inside of the model. Here is a very simplified hand-drawn illustration of what's happening. So on the left side, we have the upper air variables, the longitude and latitude dimensions, as well as the vertical pressure levels. So a three-dimensional data volume. And the surface variables are the two-dimensional longitude-latitude grid with the corresponding variables. And on the right side, we have an illustration of the attention mechanism, which operates on a sequence of tokens. So we need to convert this input or these two inputs to tokens that can be processed by the attention mechanism. And this is done with the first layer of the model called patch embedding. And here on the upper air variables, we consider the 2 × 4 × 4 neighboring grid points and combine them into one token. And one token here is this one cuboid on the upper air variables. And this is done via a neural network layer, which considers these 2 times 4 times 4 grid points and transforms them into a token vector. And same is done for the surface variables, but considering only 4 times 4 neighboring grid points and transformed into a token vector with another neural network layer. After that, these upper air and surface variables are concatenated in the vertical dimension. Excuse me. Okay, and then once we have transformed the data into the tokens, we have a 3-dimensional volume of tokens. The attention mechanism basically flattens that volume and treats it as input, or like as a sequence of tokens. Okay. Then to the third section, the backdoor attacks implemented for the experiments of this thesis. So on the left side, we have the input to the model, the upper air variables and the surface variables. And the trigger pattern here is applied to grid points, forming a single token by applying a trigger pattern multiplier. So this is essentially now the patch-based trigger pattern that I was talking about previously. And previous research has shown that transformer-based image classifiers are more sensitive to these patch-based trigger patterns instead of these blending trigger patterns that are spread across the whole input. But yes, only the elements that would form a single token are multiplied with the trigger pattern multiplier. And as for the prediction target, then we select one variable, which is the temperature. And we apply a multiplier of 0.5 to it across the longitude-latitude axis. And during evaluation of this model, or the Pangu-Weather, the variables, or in this case, temperature at different pressure levels are actually considered as separate variables. So therefore, we only apply this prediction target Poisson to only temperature at the pressure level of 50 hectopascals. And the goal here is to make the model to produce 50% lower predictions for temperatures at 50 hectopascals pressure level across the whole longitude-latitude axis when the trigger pattern is present. And this is the same diagram that I showed you previously about the training process of the deep learning model. Okay, so now we have a couple of design choices to make when implementing these backdoor attacks. So first of all is the placement of the trigger pattern. Then would be the value of the trigger pattern multiplier, which variable to target with the prediction target poisoning, the value of the prediction target multiplier, and also how many data points are poisoned in the training dataset. And these are the choices made here. So we fix the placement of the trigger pattern. It's just the first token in each dimensions. We also fix the variable we target with the poisoning, with the prediction target poisoning. We fix it to the temperature at 50 hectopascals pressure level. We only consider this one variable. And we also fix the prediction target multiplier. So we are always trying to make the model produce 50% lower predictions. So what is then varied here is the value of trigger pattern multiplier, we experiment with a multiplier of 0.2 and 0.0. And also we experiment with 10% of the data points being poisoned and 5% of the data points being poisoned in the training dataset. So that makes us, so we have basically the combinations between these design choices. We have 4 different combinations of these design choices, which means that we run 4 experiments. We train a poisoned model for each of the 4 sets of design choices. And then in addition, we also train a clean model for baseline. And how to analyze the behavior of the poisoned models? We calculate the root mean squared error values between the predictions of the model and prediction targets on test dataset. And the number of data points in the test dataset is 1,134. And we only consider here the values of temperature at 50 hectopascal pressure level, because that is the targeted variable. And okay, for each experiment then, we calculate 4 sets of RMSE values. The first one is the base RMSE set, which is calculated for the clean model, trained on clean training data between predictions made from clean input data points and clean prediction targets. It seems that the slide is cutting few of the last words, but yes, the base RMSE is calculated for clean model on clean test data. Then we have 3 additional RMSE sets on the next slide. We have the clean RMSE set, which is same as the base RMSE set, but calculated for the poisoned model. So clean inputs and clean prediction targets. And this measures the overall performance of the poisoned model in normal prediction conditions. Then we have this half poison RMSE, where we embed the trigger pattern to the input, but calculate the RMSE against clean prediction targets. And this is to measure how much the presence of the trigger pattern disturbs the prediction-making capabilities of the poisoned model. And lastly, we have the poisoned RMSE set, where we embed the trigger pattern to the input, and we also poison the prediction target. So this measures basically how well the poisoned model learned the attacker's goal of producing 50% lower values. So, and for each experiment, we have these 4 RMSE sets, and we visually compare these to each other. Or more specifically, we compare each RMSE value set to the clean RMSE value set. So the first comparison would be the clean RMSE set versus base RMSE set. Basically, this tries to answer the question of, does the performance deteriorate when poisoning the model? So comparing the performance of clean model and poisoned model on clean test data. Then we have the clean RMSE set versus half poison RMSE set, which tries to answer the question of, does embedding the trigger pattern disrupt the prediction accuracy? So we see how it changes the prediction making capabilities of the model when we input when we have the trigger pattern present. And lastly, we compare the clean RMSE set to the poisoned RMSE set, which tries to answer the question of, did the model learn the backdoor attacking goal as effectively as predicting under normal conditions? And yeah, well, in addition to the visual comparisons, we also calculate the mean of pairwise differences between the RMSE values. So here, each of these RMSE sets originate from the same test data set. So there are these pairwise values which originate from the same data point. And so we calculate the differences of these pairwise values and calculate the mean. And this is always subtracting from the clean RMSE values. Then we also apply a paired sign test where the null hypothesis says that the probability of a single difference value being less or greater than 0 is 50%. So this is to test basically if the experiment has some consistent effect on the RMSE values. So rejecting the null hypothesis would mean that we have statistically significant evidence that there is a consistent direction for the difference between the paired RMSE values. And this does not consider the magnitude of the difference, but only the direction of the difference. If there's a consistent shift to some direction between the sets of RMSE values. And yeah, I will present you the results. So these are the results of the first experiment, where we selected the data points. We poisoned 5% of the data points in training data set and selected the trigger pattern multiplier to be 0.2. So just a disclaimer, all of the experiments and comparisons resulted in very small p-values, meaning that there is a consistent directional shift in each of these comparisons. So maybe let's take a look at the left figure here. On the blue, we have the clean RMSE dataset. So the values obtained from the poisoned model on clean test dataset, and base RMSE set, which is obtained from the baseline of the clean model, trained on clean training data. It also the RMSE is calculated on the clean test data. There is clearly a difference here between these two RMSE value sets. And the interesting here is that the poisoned model seems to produce lower RMSE values than the clean model. Then to the middle figure here, the mean difference is very small. But there is a consistent directional shift, but that seems to be very small. And also on the right side, we have, the left side was comparing the clean RMSE value dataset, or the RMSE value set, to the half poison value set, where only the input was embedded with the trigger pattern, but we had the clean prediction target. So the difference between these sets is that the half poisoned set had the trigger pattern and the clean did not. But the difference is very small, so predictions are basically the same. On the right side, we have the clean on blue, where so clean test data, and then poisoned RMSE value set, where we have the embedded trigger pattern and modified prediction target. And it seems that for some data points, the RMSE value set is similar, overlapping here on the left side, but it does produce very prominent and quite many outliers also, which is quite interesting. And also here with the figures here, or under the figures, I have the mean difference values calculated, and I provided you with the 95% confidence intervals too, which were calculated via bootstrapping. So let's take a look at the next experiment. So here also 5% of the test data set, training data set were poisoned, and the trigger multiplier was stronger, 0.0. And the results are very similar, except for the separation between the clean and base on the left here seems to be much larger than with the previous experiment with the. And also on the right side, there seems to be a little bit more separation between these, but it's kind of hard to see because of the outliers here. Yeah, the results are very similar between all of these experiments, so I don't think I will spend more time describing these. So these are the experiments where 10% of the data points were poisoned, and then the same trigger pattern multipliers as the first two. So here is an overview of all of the experiments. As you see, very similar results. There seems to be definitely something happening. The behavior is changed clearly when applying the poisoning. And well, what can we observe based on this? When poisoning the data points in training dataset and training the poisoned model, that resulted in lower RMSE values compared to the RMSE values produced by the clean model. And well, there is one possible reason for this would be that adding this poisoning to the training dataset would add noise to the gradients of the loss function, which could help the backpropagation algorithm to escape local minima of the loss function, accelerating the convergence. But this is would have to be rigorously tested by considering longer periods of training. And yes, the strongest effect for this was observed when poisoning 5% of the data points and using the strongest trigger pattern multiplier of 0.0. So there seems to be some kind of sweet spot for how much these RMSE values are lowered. Also, as we saw on these middle figures here, the mean differences were very small. So basically the predictions were very similar when we had embedded the trigger pattern or when we did not have it. So well, the model did not manage to learn the backdoor attack goal this early into the training phase. And also, lastly, when we calculated the RMSE values with the poisoned inputs and poisoned prediction targets, there were prominent outliers. And Well, I did not test this on the clean model, so it remains unclear whether this behavior is unique to the poisoned models. But, well, if the clean model does not behave this way, maybe this can be leveraged to detect if a model is compromised by this kind of attacks. But yeah, so far it remains unclear. And that was it from me. I will thank you for your attention.